Hello everyone and welcome back. So in part one of this video, we saw how to create one of the cool inputs. We validated it. We also made sure that we overcame the problem of focus coming back uh, in our style components via style components. In this part of the video, we will see how components can be used to create global styles. You see, when we write our CSS for any web application, we always start by resetting the browser defaults, the borders and paddings and margins and so on and so forth. We also set some basic style for our elements, the body tag. So these are not really related to a component as we saw till now. We will see how that can be created. We will also extend our input, cool input, which we have done in the previous video. Uh, to not take our the placeholder text all the way out, but rest on the border in a very nice way. And of course, in this way, we will see how inheritance of the CSS works in style components. So without much wasting much time, let's get started. So if you see our application, my control is still at the top left. There is nothing happening over here. Ideally, I would like to reset certain parameters of the browser, make it a bit in the middle, uh, have some body tag implemented. Right now, there is nothing. So to do that, what we need to do is to import a function from style components called createGlobalStyles. And then within createGlobalStyles, I can have my um, base CSS for the complete application created. Anything and everything can go over there. It's not rocket science. So I'm setting my box sizing over here and then the tags for the body, all the properties. I can also set as an example over here an ID based on the hash ID selector of CSS, and this will target to the root element in my index.html file, right? The way to use that is to simply use my constant over here, and I can specify my global style here. I get an error, of course, because the fundamental rule of JSX is that you cannot have two elements at the root. It has to be one function, one return statement, one root element. So I could either have done it via div, put both of them under divs, but then it will work, of course, as you can see. But the problem is I am rendering one additional element without it doing anything. So the good way to do that is to use React Fragments. It's a shortcut, let's say, a workaround provided by React. So this will also work. Now, if I save it, uh, I should see a bit change in my, you see, all my body tags have got added. Body CSS has been added to my React application. And this is done via style components. One good thing about, though I will not show it, but one good thing about this approach of style component is that this at the end of the day is a variable. It's a JavaScript variable. It's not CSS. It's not anything else. So I can always go ahead and manipulate this object runtime and then get my CSS changed. It is possible. I can also get the name of the classes that has been generated behind the scenes by a style component and play around with them. Which, if you think about as a developer, it's a pretty strong ability to manipulate the CSS like that. Cool. So what do next do we have? What I would like to do now is to extend my cool input, this one, so that the text does not go all the way out, but it should just rest nicely on the border, something like this, right? Otherwise, the functionality stays the same. My validation is same, my color scheme and everything stays the same. My transition stays the same. And how to do that is to I can either do a complete copy paste, including of the style CSS, but then I'll be duplicating my code, right? One way to handle this would be to implement something called parameters in style components. So I could, just like in normal component, I am putting the input reps. I can also set these, props. I can also set these props to my placeholder variable over here. And because at the end of the day, the style.span is nothing, it's a function. It's a function which is used, it's a special type of function called template literal functions. And this thing is going into the function of span. It's a styled component function. It's not an element as such, right? And this is going as a string, and all style component is doing is to say it calculates all the css based on parsing this string, and then says, hey, return to this guy a span jsx element, not an html element but a jsx element with the css proper with a class of blah 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 over here, right? And this blah 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 is nothing but having all the properties which we defined over here. That's all what style component is doing behind the scenes. But that's one way to do it. Sorry, so I would put the link to that video on how to do that in my description. Please have a look at it. But for the sake of argument over here, what I would like to do is two things. First, reuse my code. So that means any other component can use exactly the same code without much ado, without much problem, and then also override it. So inheritance plus overridence, how to do that. So the first thing I would do as a good developer is to move my all these parameters or slash css, whatever you want to call them, into a separate file, right? So let's go ahead and create a new styles.css. So let's call it styles.jsx, sorry, js, right? And then I can move out the complete thing from input out here. Let's copy the same thing because all I need to do is, as I mentioned, I only need to change my top. So not 25 pixel, but 10 pixel, and then add some um, padding and I think margins we will see to the new entity. So let's go ahead, copy it, styles.js. Let's go here. That's okay. I need to incorporate my styles, right? And also, of course, I need to export them here so that I can import them from beneath. So let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, I will export them over here. Now, let's go ahead and create a new function or new component, which we'll call input text on border. Copy, create a new file. Okay, .jsx. Pretty straightforward. For the sake of argument, I will simply copy paste my code. Exactly the same code, but of course I will not be using these values because I would like to import them. And in any big project, that's what the functionality would be. Right, let's rename this guy. Everything else pretty much stays the same. Okay, okay, okay. And now here I can say, hey, you, hey, you, hey, you. Do you know that song? Out there on your own. Indian accent, Pink Floyd is funny. Does it compile? I guess so. So I'm importing all the style component variables which I have defined over here. Now, if I save it, I might be able to compile it. It does compile. That's enough. Fair enough. Can I import it over here just to see if it is running or not? So import text on border. Let's go to app.js. Over here, I would import it again. Something like this. Let's go ahead and import it. I don't need this guy. Copy, paste, cut. Paste it. blah, 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 blah. And then I simply need to use the value here. I'm doing exactly the same thing. So because there's no change in the functionality, so why should I care? Let's go ahead, save it. Sorry, this guy. Yes, the only other thing I would do, because I would like to have different error messages. So I don't want to club that if somebody uses input text, then the message should, if is using input text out component and there is some problem, it should show the error message over here. So for the sake of the demo, I would just use a different one and I will keep them separate. Mm, let's call it this. Otherwise, it's the same functionality. It does, and now it's the same functionality because everything was same, right? We didn't change it. Now what I need to do, as we can see over here, if you click on focus of my input, the only thing I'm doing different in this case is changing the value of top to minus 20 from 25 to 10 and then adding these three properties, right? That's the only difference. So let me copy this thing. Give me another input border. It's a constant, it's a variable, and it should be based on input. So pick up all the styles, anything you had defined in your input, which is all these values. I want them exactly the same, except I would override two properties in it, right? That's all there it is to. That's how you would reuse your code, and that's a functionality. That's a benefit of using style components, which you will not get in traditional CSS. So one of the reasons why you can use it, of course, because of this thing, input border, and now I can simply say input border here, input border here, save it, it compiles, yes, 3000, go here, and voila, my new code kicks in. So as you saw, style components are pretty powerful, pretty strong candidate for CSS. But of course, everything has its plus and negatives. On the plus side, style components are very developer friendly, if I could say so. It's a very developery way of handling your CSS. You see, you have to think a bit differently. It's not the traditional way of just putting it in a app.css complete CSS file and then just using it like classes, right? Because what you could always do is, with the help of interpolation, change your CSS properties at a fly like this. We did a project where we took the screen resolution, we calculated the screen resolution at the time of rendering the component. Each component, we figured out what the rendition, the screen resolution is, and depending upon that, we changed the width, the flexbox options, row, column, everything with that. So we didn't even have to write any media query at all, because we were changing all the parameters with the help of this variable of which resolution it was. Now, it's a very cool way to do it. It's a very strong way to do it. We were writing less CSS for sure, but then the flip side is it's not a designer friendly approach to do so. Imagine a scenario where and I think this is most of the case, that you will get your CSS from a designer. It's a picture perfect design CSS he has created. Now, if you're using style components in a proper way, then you have to cut and paste the chunk out of it. You will take the topmost code, you will put it in create global style function, use that one, then uh, cut out each component into its own JSX file, and within JSX file also, then you need to figure out which element, what resolution it is, override the media query, and blah blah blah. There's lots of chunk cuts and pieces which you will do, and you will end up spending some more time on it. Maybe that's what you want, but maybe that's not what the project manager wants. So it's more of a balance you need to figure out. It's not a very designer friendly. It's not a very designery way to do so. I wouldn't say designer friendly, pardon me, but designery way to do so, right? Uh, as I said, style components are very succinct. You definitely write less CSS with them. But the flip side is it's one more learning curve on your team. So if you are working on a high velocity team where lots of people keep on coming and going frequently, then it's an additional learning curve for a new person to join. But because at the end of the day, app.css, the traditional way of using CSS in modules, for example, even everyone knows how that works. Everyone knows how class works and media query works. So all you need to do is just refer to them. So it's additional learning curve on your team. That's another point you need to take care of. Inheritance is beautiful in style component, like we just saw. You can reuse a lot of code, but you can also do to a certain extent the same thing with the help of SAS and less. So you need to think about it. And lastly, style component is additional dependency on your code, on your application. It's an external npm package. At the end of the day, um, unlike CSS modules and the old way of putting everything in app.css, um, they will stay for next at least half a decade or a decade at least, right? React will stay for a decade. Style component, it's flavor of the month. Everyone is using it. We will have to see which way it goes. So if you are writing something which you know is only the lifetime of your project, the usage of your project is only for a couple of years, then style component can do your job. That's not a problem. But if you are really thinking long term, a decade, half a decade to a decade or timeline, then think carefully. I'm not saying style component should not be used in, of course not. It's a wonderful product to use, but think about the lifetime of your whole project. It should not be a case where you have to rewrite the whole thing because style component is not supported anymore, or the contributors are not updating it, for example. Or even if there's a security, for example, fix which needs to be rolled out and that's not available. I'm not sure how that story will play around, but these are certainly the key areas you should look into before implementing style components in your project. So that's all from my side. I hope you like the video. A quick shout out to Beyond Semicolon. The basic idea of cool inputs and majority of the CSS which I used are coming from him. I will put his YouTube link down. Please do please do check that out. And if you like my work, please do hit like, share, and subscribe. It will mean a lot to me. And I see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye bye.